Faces that vanish in the crowd. Part 1, The Stories That Linger. The rain tapped a relentless rhythm against my apartment window, a staccato beat that seemed to echo the unease coiled in my gut. I sat at my cluttered desk, the glow of a single desk lamp casting long shadows across stacks of notebooks, each page scrawled with fragments of stories, tales of the strange, the unsettling, the inexplicable. My name is Alex, and I'm a journalist, though not the kind who chases headlines or city hall scandals. My obsession lies in the margins, where ordinary places turn sinister, where a night out becomes a brush with something you can't unsee. Bars, in particular, fascinate me. They're liminal spaces, thresholds between joy and dread, where people shed their inhibitions and sometimes stumble into nightmares. Tonight, as the storm growled outside, I was piecing together 3 accounts that had haunted me for weeks, each one a shard of terror glinting in the dim light of memory. My apartment, a cramped 1-bedroom in a creaky Brooklyn brownstone, felt like a cocoon against the world's chaos. The walls, papered in faded florals, bore the scars of decades, nicks, smudges, and a faint watermark from a long-ago leak. My desk, a thrift store find, groaned under the weight of my work, a chipped mug of cold coffee, a half-eaten bagel, and a recorder that had captured more confessions than I cared to count. I leaned back in my chair, its springs squeaking, and let my gaze drift to the window. Beyond the rain-smeared glass, the city pulsed, car horns, distant sirens, the low hum of lives unfolding. But my mind was elsewhere, tangled in the stories I'd collected from Sarah, Kevin, and Lisa, 3 strangers whose lives had been upended by what they'd encountered in bars. Their voices, raw and trembling, replayed in my head, each one a plea to be heard, to be believed. I'd always been drawn to the uncanny, even as a kid. Back then, it was ghost stories whispered at sleepovers, the thrill of fear tempered by the safety of a sleeping bag. Now, at 32, that fascination had morphed into something deeper, a need to understand why certain moments lodge in our bones, why some places feel alive with menace. Bars were perfect for this. They're theaters of human desire, where laughter mingles with desperation, where a stranger's glance can spark romance or ruin. I'd spent years haunting their corners, nursing cheap beers while eavesdropping on lives unraveling. Dive bars were my favorite, the kind with sticky floors and jukeboxes that skipped, where the air smelled of stale hops and regret. It was in one such place, a hole in the wall called the Rusty Anchor, that I'd met Sarah, the first of my storytellers, her eyes shadowed with a fear she couldn't shake. The Rusty Anchor sat on a forgotten corner of the borough, its neon sign flickering like a dying star. I'd been there a month ago, scribbling notes on a napkin, when Sarah slid onto the stool beside me. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her fingers twisted the stem of a wine glass with nervous precision. "You're the guy who writes about weird stuff, right?" she'd asked, her voice low, as if the words might summon trouble. I nodded, caught off guard by her directness. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the bar's dim interior, scarred wooden tables, a dartboard pocked with holes, a bartender wiping glasses with a rag that looked older than the building. "I've got a story," she said, "but you'll think I'm crazy." I assured her I'd heard crazier, though the tremor in her hand suggested otherwise. Over the next hour, she poured out a tale of a night gone wrong, of a pool game that turned predatory, of an AirTag in a car that stalked her street. Her words were halting, punctuated by sips of wine, and I felt the weight of her fear, as if it were a physical thing pressing against my chest. Sarah's story wasn't just a recounting, it was a confession, a way to exorcise the panic that still woke her at night. I listened, my pen scratching furiously, capturing every detail, the scuff of the pool tables felt, the cold bite of the street where she smashed the AirTag, the slow crawl of that Lincoln past her house. When she finished, her eyes were glassy, and she whispered, "Do you think he's still out there?" I didn't have an answer, only a hollow reassurance that she'd done the right thing by telling someone. As she left, her silhouette swallowed by the rain beyond the bar's door, I knew her story would haunt me. It wasn't just the events, it was the violation of her safety, the way a place meant for solace had betrayed her. I tucked her napkin-scrawled notes into my pocket, already sensing this was only the beginning. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop, the screen's blue light harsh against the room's gloom. Sarah's story was the first I'd typed up, but it wasn't alone. Kevin's came next, a bartender whose life of quiet routine was shattered by a stranger who knew too much. I'd met him at his workplace, a ritzy rooftop bar that gleamed with polished chrome and city views, a stark contrast to the rusty Anchor's grit. Kevin was 40, broad-shouldered, with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. He'd poured me a whiskey neat, my usual order to blend in, and leaned across the counter, his voice barely audible over the clink of glasses. "Something happened here," he'd said, "and I can't let it go." His story unfolded in clipped sentences, each one laced with disbelief: a man with a scowl and a cryptic threat, a knife shears, a knife in his bedroom, a break-in with no trace. As he spoke, I watched his hands, steady when pouring drinks, tremble slightly, betraying the fear he tried to mask. The rooftop's ambience, twinkling string lights, the hum of affluent chatter, felt at odds with his tale, making it all the more chilling. Kevin's account stirred something in me, a mix of empathy and dread. I'd always prided myself on my detachment, my ability to listen without getting sucked in, but his confusion, his repeated, "I don't know what he meant," echoed my own questions about the world's hidden corners. Who was this man, John, who knew Kevin's name? How had he entered a locked house? I left the bar that night, the city skyline glittering below, feeling as if I'd glimpsed something I wasn't meant to see. Kevin's parting words lingered: "Be careful what you go looking for, Alex. Some things find you." Lisa's story, the third, came to me by chance, overheard in a bustling suburban bar outside Baltimore. I'd been there on a whim, chasing a lead that fizzled, but Lisa, a bartender with a quick smile and tired eyes, caught my attention. The place was alive, pulsing music, dancing college kids, the clatter of glasses. I sat at the counter, nursing a soda, when I heard her mutter to a coworker about "those creepy old people." Curiosity piqued, I struck up a conversation, and soon she was telling me about an elderly couple who sat motionless, staring at walls, then at her, before vanishing. Her voice cracked as she described seeing them later under a streetlight, her hands gripping the bar's edge. "I know I saw them," she'd insisted, though her coworker, Karen, swore no such couple had been there. Lisa's doubt, her fear of losing her grip on reality, was palpable, and I felt a pang of guilt for prodding her to relive it. The bar's energy, sweaty bodies, spilled tequila, a DJ's bass thumping, clashed with Lisa's quiet horror, like a scream muffled by laughter. I noticed details as she spoke: the faint burn scar on her wrist, the way she scanned the crowd as if expecting those figures to reappear. Her story wasn't just unsettling, it was disorienting, a puzzle with missing pieces. Driving home that night, the highway's sodium lights blurring past, I kept picturing that empty booth, those figures across the street. Lisa's final words to me were soft, almost lost in the bar's din: "What if they weren't real?" I didn't answer, but the question clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. Now, as I sat in my apartment, the rain's cadence slowing to a drizzle, I stared at the open document on my screen. Sarah, Kevin, Lisa, their stories were threads in a tapestry I couldn't yet see, each one a glimpse into a world where safety was an illusion. I felt their fear, their bewilderment, as if it had seeped into my own skin. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. Writing these accounts wasn't just about recording them, it was about honoring the trust they'd placed in me, the courage it took to speak. But there was something else, a whisper at the edge of my thoughts. What if by telling these stories, I was inviting their darkness into my own life? I stood, stretching my cramped limbs, and crossed to the window. The city beyond was quieter now, the storm's fury spent, leaving only wet streets and the occasional flicker of headlights. I thought of the bars I'd visited, their smells, their sounds, their secrets, and wondered what else lay hidden in their corners. Sarah's stalker, Kevin's intruder, Lisa's phantoms, were they random cruelties, tricks of the mind, or something older, hungrier? I didn't have answers, only a growing sense that these stories weren't just tales to be told. They were warnings, etched in fear, and I was only beginning to understand their weight. Turning back to my desk, I sat and began to type, my fingers steady despite the unease curling in my chest. I'd start with Sarah, her voice still vivid in my mind, and move to Kevin, then Lisa, letting their words guide me. The lamp's light flickered, casting a brief shadow across the wall, and for a moment, I thought I heard something, a creak, a whisper, beyond the apartment's walls. I shook it off, blaming the late hour, the rain's lingering echo. But as I wrote, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in the city's endless sprawl, something was listening, waiting for its story to be told. The ache of losing Mark clung to me like damp fog, seeping into every quiet moment. It had been 3 months since we parted, not with shouting or tears, but with a mutual sigh that we'd outgrown each other. Still, the absence of him, of us, gnawed at me. I'd sworn off texting him, a self-imposed exile to heal, but some nights, like this random Wednesday, the loneliness was a weight I couldn't carry alone. I stood in my cramped apartment, the kitchen clock ticking too loudly, its hands mocking my inertia. My gaze fell on the pool cue leaning against the wall, its polished wood a relic of nights spent laughing over green felt with Mark. We'd been unstoppable, trading shots in dive bars where the air was thick with cigarette ghosts and old dreams. I wasn't ready to wallow anymore. Grabbing my jacket, I decided to revisit one of those haunts, not for nostalgia, but to reclaim a piece of myself. The decision felt reckless, a spark of defiance against my usual caution, and it propelled me out the door into the night's chill. The bar, Clancy's, crouched on a sagging street corner, its neon sign stuttering, "See," in a feeble red glow. Inside, the dimness was a familiar embrace, worn stools creaking under patrons' weight, a jukebox crooning a warped Johnny Cash tune, the faint tang of spilled beer baked into the floorboards. I hesitated at the threshold, my heart stuttering as memories of Mark flooded back, his easy grin as he lined up a shot, the way he'd nudge my elbow to throw me off. The pang was sharp, but I swallowed it, weaving through the sparse crowd, mostly graying men nursing whiskeys, their eyes fixed on nothing. I ordered a gin and tonic, the glass cold against my palm, and drifted to the pool table in the corner. Its felt was scuffed, the cues warped, but it was a sanctuary. Chalking a cue, I traced its grain with my thumb, grounding myself in its texture. I wasn't sure what I'd do, playing alone felt absurd, but standing there, I felt a flicker of control, a tether to the person I'd been before the breakup shattered me. I was lost in the rhythm of chalking when a voice broke my reverie. "Fancy a game?" it asked, low and casual. I looked up to see a guy, Jake, he'd later say, leaning against the table, his frame lanky under a faded flannel. Mid-20s, with a crooked smile and eyes that didn't quite meet mine, he was the only one here close to my age. My instinct was to decline, I'm shy, more comfortable blending into shadows than chatting with strangers. But something in his easy posture, the way he twirled a cue like it was an extension of him, nudged me to nod. "Sure, rack 'em up," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He grinned, slotting coins into the table's mechanism with a clink. As he arranged the balls, I noticed his racking was sloppy, stripes and solids jumbled, the triangle loose. I bit back a laugh, not wanting to seem smug, but it reminded me how Mark would have teased me for letting it slide. Shaking off the thought, I focused on the break, the cue balls crack a small rebellion against my spiraling mind. We played 3 rounds, and I won each one, my shots precise despite the table's uneven slate. Jake wasn't bad, his angles were decent, but he lacked finesse, overhitting shots that needed a softer touch. Between turns, we talked, light, surface-level stuff about the bar, the weather, the music. He bought me a second drink, the gin's bite loosening my tongue. I relaxed, the game's rhythm soothing the raw edges of my heart. Jake wasn't like Mark, whose quick wit could unravel me in a sentence. His conversation meandered, a bit dull, but it was a distraction I welcomed. My laughter came easier, a sound I hadn't heard in weeks, and for a moment, I felt unburdened, as if the bar's dim glow could burn away my regrets. But beneath that ease, a quiet voice whispered caution. Jake's gaze lingered too long, his smiles felt rehearsed. I ignored it, chalking it up to my own paranoia, my tendency to overthink every interaction since the breakup left me raw. After the fourth game, Jake leaned close, his breath warm with beer. "Wanna head back to my place?" he asked, the words abrupt, slicing through the night's fragile calm. My stomach twisted, caught off guard. I wasn't naive, bars bred these moments, but the shift in his tone, from friendly to expectant, jarred me. I forced a playful smile, deflecting. "Gonna need a second date for that," I said, aiming for light but hearing the tremor in my voice. I wasn't against the idea of moving on, but not here, not now, not with a stranger on a Wednesday night. His face changed in an instant, his smile vanished, replaced by a scowl that made his eyes seem darker, harder. "Are you serious?" he snapped, his voice low but venomous. Before I could react, he grabbed my wrist, his grip tight enough to sting, and snatched my purse from the table. "I spent all that money on your drinks," he hissed, his words a blade against my shock. My mind blanked, fear rooting me to the spot, every self-defense tip I'd ever read dissolving in the face of his anger. I should have screamed, yanked free, done something, but I froze, my body betraying me in that crowded room. The bar's hum, glasses clinking, a laugh from the jukebox, felt distant, as if I were underwater. Jake's grip tightened, and I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of entitlement that chilled me deeper than his words. My heart hammered, a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and I wondered if anyone would notice, if I was as invisible as I felt. Then, salvation, two older men, their faces weathered and stern, stepped forward from a nearby table. "Let her go," one growled, his voice cutting through the haze. Jake glared at me, muttering something I couldn't catch, then threw my purse onto the table with a thud. He stormed out, the door slamming behind him, leaving a silence that pressed against my skin. I stammered thanks to the men, their nods kind but brief, and grabbed my purse, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone to call an Uber. The bar, once a refuge, now felt like a trap, its walls closing in. In the Uber, the city blurred past, streetlights bleeding into the dark, the driver's radio a soft murmur. I curled into the seat, exhaustion crashing over me, and closed my eyes, hoping to escape the night's weight. I must have dozed, because the driver's gentle "we're here" startled me awake. We were parked across from my house, a modest two-story with peeling paint, its porch light a weak beacon. I thanked him, stepping into the cold, the air sharp against my flushed cheeks. Rummaging for my keys, I checked my phone on impulse, and the notification hit like a punch, "AirTag found moving with you." My breath caught, my fingers trembling as I tore through my purse, wallet, lipstick, tissues, until they brushed something small, foreign. I pulled it out, a white disc glinting under the streetlight, and my blood ran cold. Jake. It had to be him. Panic surged, a tidal wave drowning reason, and I hurled the AirTag to the pavement, stomping it until it cracked, its pieces scattering like my fraying nerves. I fought a scream, my breaths ragged, the night's silence now a threat. I sprinted to my back door, the key shaking in my hand as I fumbled the lock. Inside, I slammed the door, the deadbolts click a hollow comfort. My heart pounded, a drumbeat of terror, and I leaned against the wall, the plaster cool against my back. The house was still, too still, its shadows deeper than they should have been. I climbed the stairs to my room, each creak a reminder of my vulnerability. Sleep was impossible, my mind replayed Jake's scowl, the AirTag's beep, the violation of knowing someone could track me. I sat on my bed, hugging my knees, and stared out the window, hoping the familiar view, maple trees, quiet lawns, would calm me. Instead, I saw it, an old Lincoln, its paint chipped, creeping down the street. My breath hitched. It passed again, slower, then a third time, the driver's window half down, a hand dangling out, holding something that glinted, a knife. My pulse roared, and when the car stopped across from my house, I ducked below the sill, my body trembling, too scared to move. Minutes bled into an hour, and when I dared to look, the car was gone. The street was empty, but the fear wasn't. I stayed awake, the night stretching endless, my thoughts a tangle of what-ifs. Had Jake followed me? Did he know my street, my house? The AirTag meant he'd planned this, a predator cloaked in casual charm. I felt exposed, my sanctuary tainted. By morning, I told my parents, my voice cracking as I spilled everything. Dad's face tightened, anger and worry warring in his eyes. "You should have called the police," he said, his tone sharp but softened by a hug. He phoned his friend, a police chief, who listened grimly but said without a plate number or more evidence, their hands were tied. "Call if you see that car again," he urged. I nodded, but the words felt flimsy against the dread pooling in me. I stayed inside for days, jumping at every engine's hum, scanning the street for that Lincoln. It hasn't returned, but the fear lingers, a shadow I can't outrun, whispering that Jake's still out there, watching, waiting. Part 3, The Man Who Knew My Name. At 40, I've carved out a life that suits me, solitary but steady, like a well-worn groove in a vinyl record. No kids, no partner, just a modest house in a quiet neighborhood and a job tending bar at the Skyline, a ritzy rooftop lounge 20 minutes from my middle-of-the-road street. The place gleams with wealth, polished marble counters, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city's jagged horizon, air scented with citrus and money. I'm not part of that world, but the tips are generous, and the work keeps my hands busy and my mind quiet. On a Friday night, the bar thrums with life, laughter bouncing off glass, heels clicking on tile, the clink of ice in overpriced cocktails. I'm in my element, reading patrons like open books, the guy ordering a martini to impress his date, the woman sipping bourbon to drown a bad day. As I polish a glass, its surface cool and slick, I feel a flicker of pride in my detachment, my ability to observe without being seen. But tonight, that armor feels thin, as if the city's pulse beyond the windows is warning me of something I can't yet name. The crowd swells, a tide of silk dresses and tailored suits, their voices a crescendo against the jazz trio's smooth hum. I'm pouring a line of old fashions, my hands steady despite the chaos, when a figure cuts through the haze. He's out of place, a man with jet black hair, tangled like a storm cloud, and a faded leather jacket streaked with grime. His face is taut, jaw clenched, eyes burning with a fury that makes my pulse skip. He doesn't sit, just plants himself at the bar's edge, staring at me like I owe him something. I set down the bitters bottle, its weight grounding me, and force a neutral smile. "What can I get you?" I ask, my voice calm but laced with unease. He doesn't answer right away, his silence a blade hovering over the moment. My fingers tighten on the bar's edge, the marble's chill seeping into my skin, and I wonder how he slipped past the doorman, whose job is to filter out anyone who doesn't scream privilege. The question gnaws at me, a splinter in my thoughts, but I push it aside, waiting for his reply. Finally, he mutters, "Double Jägermeister." The request jars me, nobody here orders that, not when we stock single malts older than I am. I nod, grabbing a glass, its heft reassuring as I pour the dark liquor. The scent stings my nose, sharp and medicinal, pulling me back to my early bartending days in dive joints where Jaeger was king. I slide the drink across, watching his hands, calloused, unsteady, as he tosses crumpled bills onto the counter. Cash is rare here, most patrons flash cards with embossed names. I ring him up, my movements mechanical, but my mind races. Who is he? Why the anger? I steal a glance at his face, hoping for a clue, but his eyes are locked on me, unyielding, like a predator sizing up prey. I turn away, serving a couple at the bar's far end, their laughter a fleeting shield against the stranger's presence. But his gaze burns into my back, a weight I can't shake, stirring a dread I haven't felt since I was a kid, hiding from my father's drunken rages. I'm wiping down the counter, the rag's damp fibers catching on my calluses, when he speaks again, his voice low and deliberate. "I knew I'd find you here, Kevin." The words hit like a fist, stopping my breath. I freeze, the rag slipping from my hand, and turn to face him. "How do you know my name?" I demand, keeping my tone hushed to avoid a scene, but my heart's pounding, a frantic drum in my chest. He doesn't answer, just holds my gaze, his eyes glinting with something, accusation, maybe, or triumph. "I know what you did," he adds, each syllable a stone dropped into still water. My mind scrambles, searching for meaning. I'm no saint, petty arguments, a few regrets, but nothing to warrant this. "What are you talking about?" I snap, louder than intended, drawing a glance from a nearby patron. He says nothing, just turns and strides toward the elevators, his jacket flapping like a tattered flag. I want to chase him, demand answers, but I'm tethered to the bar, my job a chain I can't break. I stand there, the glass in my hand trembling slightly, the night's rhythm shattered. The rest of my shift drags, each pore and smile a chore. I keep replaying his words, dissecting them for clues. "I know what you did I cut him off at a bar years ago? Bump into him on the street? My life's uneventful, no enemies, no grudges, but doubt creeps in, a whisper that I've overlooked something." I scan the crowd, half expecting him to reappear, but he's gone, leaving only his shadow in my thoughts. When I finally clock out, the city's glow beyond the windows feels colder, less inviting. Driving home, my old sedan rattling over potholes, I grip the wheel too tightly, my knuckles pale. My neighborhood greets me with its usual quiet, split-level houses, lawns edged with precision, streetlights casting soft halos. But tonight, it feels exposed, as if the man's words have stripped away its safety. I lock my front door, the bolts click too loud in the silence, and head to bed, hoping sleep will dull the unease curling in my gut. Sometime past midnight, I jolt awake, my heart racing before I know why. The room is dark, the only sound my own uneven breathing. I lie still, eyes straining against the blackness, every nerve alert. Something's wrong, I feel it, like a shift in the air's weight. My gaze darts to the corner by the door, where shadows pool deeper than they should. Then I see it, a shape, human but wrong, standing motionless. Fear spikes through me, sharp and electric, but I force myself to stay still, feigning sleep. My mind screams, someone's in my house, each repetition a hammer against my calm. I count to 3, my breath shallow, and launch myself from bed, a yell tearing from my throat. I'm ready to fight, fists clenched, but the figure bolts, a blur of movement. Something clatters to the floor as he flees, and I give chase, bare feet slapping hardwood, through the living room to the front door. It's wide open, the night's chill pouring in. He's gone, swallowed by the dark, and I slam the door, locking it with shaking hands, my pulse a wild thing in my throat. I stand there, chest heaving, the house's silence now a taunt. My thoughts spiral, how did he get in? I check every window, every lock, finding no sign of tampering. The realization hits, he was here, in my space, and I don't know how. I creep back to my bedroom, flicking on the light, and stop cold. There, in the corner, lies a knife, my kitchen knife, its blade glinting under the bulb's glare. He'd taken it, held it while I slept, maybe stood over me. Nausea churns in me, a sick wave of violation. I grab my phone, dialing 911, my voice cracking as I explain, a break-in, a man from the bar, a knife. The police arrive quickly, their flashlights slicing through my yard, but they find nothing, no footprints, no forced entry. I describe him, John, I call him, for lack of a name, his wild hair, his stained jacket, his furious eyes. They pull footage from the Skyline's cameras, but weeks later, there's no trace, no leads. I sit on my couch, the knife now bagged as evidence, and stare at the locked door, its solidity a lie. Every night since, I check the locks twice, my fingers lingering on the bolts as if touch can make them stronger. I don't sleep through the night anymore, waking at every creak, every gust of wind. John's words haunt me, I know what you did, a riddle I can't solve. I've racked my brain, sifting through years for a face, a moment, anything to explain his rage, but there's nothing. The bar, once my domain, feels different now, its gleam tarnished. I scan every patron, searching for his scowl, but he's a ghost, real only in the fear he left behind. I tell myself he's gone, that it was a one-off, but doubt lingers, a quiet poison. What if he knows where I live? What if he comes back? I keep working, pouring drinks with a smile, but inside, I'm braced for the next shadow, the next voice that knows my name too well. Part 4, The Faces in the Booth. The bar where I work, the Red Lantern, is a pulsing beast, alive with sweat and sound just outside Baltimore's sleepy suburbs. No waiters, just us bartenders and the cook slinging burgers in the back, means you order at the counter, grab your food, and dive back into the chaos. It's a cheap setup, but I thrive in the frenzy, pouring drinks, trading quips, watching lives collide under the flicker of Edison bulbs. I'm Lisa, 28, with a knack for remembering faces and a heart that feeds on the crowd's energy. On a weekend night like this, the place is a kaleidoscope of college kids, shouting, dancing, spilling beer on the scuffed oak floor. I'm behind the bar, my hands a blur as I line up tequila shots, the bottle's weight steadying me. Each pour is a small act of control, a way to anchor myself in the storm. But beneath my smile, there's a hunger for connection, a quiet ache for something more than fleeting chats with strangers, a need I bury in the rhythm of work. The night kicks into high gear, the DJ's bass rattling the glasses stacked beside me. I'm dodging a guy's slurred pickup line, third time tonight, same tired grin, when I notice a couple slip into a corner booth. They're older, maybe 70s, their gray hair catching the dim light like frost. It's odd, they don't fit this rowdy scene, where neon face paint and ripped jeans rule. I wipe a glass, its cloth damp against my fingers, and steal another glance. They sit rigid, hands folded, staring at the wall beside them. No drinks, no food, no words. My curiosity flares, a spark in the monotony, but the bar's demands pull me back, another round of shots, a spilled soda to mop up. Still, their stillness nags at me, like a painting hung slightly crooked. I wonder if they're lost, waiting for someone, or just oblivious to our no-waiter system. My fingers itch to check on them, but I push the urge down, focusing on the clink of coins in the tip jar, a small validation of my place in this chaos. An hour later, I'm pouring gin and tonics, the lime zest sharp in the air, when my eyes drift back to the booth. They haven't moved, not a twitch, not a glance at each other. Their gazes are locked on that blank wall, as if it holds secrets I can't see. My stomach twists, a subtle unease I can't name. I keep pouring, muscle memory guiding my hands, but my mind lingers on them. Are they grieving? Meditating? The bar's noise, laughter, a glass shattering, the DJ's shout, feels distant, like I'm caught in their orbit. I shake it off, chalking it up to fatigue, but the image sticks, a splinter in my thoughts. I've always prided myself on reading people, knowing who's lonely, who's lying, but these two are a cipher, their silence louder than the crowd. I grip the bar's edge, its worn wood grounding me, and resolve to approach them when I get a break, driven by a mix of duty and a creeping need to understand. When the rush ebbs, I weave through the crowd, the air thick with sweat and cheap cologne, and reach their booth. I plaster on my warmest smile, the one I use to coax tips from grumps. Hey, can I get you folks anything? Food, drinks, I ask, my voice bright despite the oddity of their stillness. The woman doesn't flinch, her eyes fixed on the wall, her face pale as parchment. The man turns, slow as a rusted hinge, and I stifle a gasp. His skin is waxy, wrinkled like crumpled paper, his eyes sunken into dark hollows. He stares at me, unblinking, and shakes his head once, a sharp, silent refusal. My smile falters, my pulse quickening as his gaze pierces me, cold and ancient, like he sees something I don't. Okay, just let me know, I mumble, retreating to the bar, my steps unsteady. I grip a shaker, its metal cool against my palms, and try to laugh off the chill in my gut. They don't belong here, I think, not in this century, not in this bar. The thought feels absurd, but it clings, a shadow on my confidence. I avoid looking at their booth for hours, busying myself with orders, whiskey sours, IPAs, a mocktail for a sober kid. The bar's energy surges, bodies swaying near the DJ booth, but I feel detached, as if their presence has dimmed the room's vibrance. I polish a glass, its surface reflecting my own tired eyes, and wrestle with doubt. Am I imagining things? I've always trusted my instincts, but now they waver, shaken by that man's stare. I've built my life on connection, smiles, stories, the fleeting bonds of a night, but what if I'm too open, seeing meaning where there's none? The thought stings, a crack in my self-assured shell. When the crowd thins, I glance at the booth on impulse, and my breath catches. They're staring at me now, both of them, their eyes like twin voids, unblinking, pinning me in place. My hands fumble, nearly dropping a glass, its clatter muffled by the bar's din. I look away, pretending to wipe the counter, my heart a frantic bird in my chest, but their gaze burns, a weight I can't escape. Minutes later, I check again, and the booth is empty. Relief washes over me, sharp and sudden, though guilt tugs at its edges. Am I cruel to be glad they're gone? I shake it off, focusing on closing duties, the bar's lights now harsh against the emptying space. As I wipe down the counter, the rag's dampness soaking my fingers, I turn to Karen, my coworker, a veteran with a memory like a steel trap. Did you see that old couple in the corner booth? I ask, my voice casual but laced with need. She frowns, her brows knitting as she stacks glasses. What couple? She says, her tone puzzled. I blink, my stomach sinking. The elderly ones, gray hair, sitting there for hours, I press, pointing to the booth. Karen shakes her head, listing half a dozen patrons she served, red dress, blue cap, curly beard, none matching my description. You hallucinating, Lisa, she teases, her laugh warm but jarring. I force a chuckle, praising her memory, but inside, I'm unraveling, my certainty fraying like old rope. We lock up, the bar now silent, its floors sticky with spilled dreams. I step outside, the night air crisp, the parking lot lit by a single streetlight's sickly glow. My keys jangle in my hand, a nervous tick, as I head to my car. Then I see them, two figures, unmistakable, standing under that lone streetlight across the street. Their silhouettes are sharp, their stillness unnatural, like statues carved from shadow. My keys slip, nearly falling, and my throat tightens, a scream trapped inside. I don't wait, I dive into my car, lock the doors with a click that echoes my panic, and peel out of the lot, tires squealing on asphalt. The drive home is a blur, my hands trembling on the wheel, my mind a storm of questions. Oh my God, I whisper, over and over, a mantra against the fear clawing at me. Were they real? Did Karen miss them? Am I losing it? The highway's light streak past, each one a fleeting anchor, but the doubt festers, a wound I can't close. At home, I lock every door, check every window, my fingers lingering on the latches as if they could hold back the unknown. I sit on my couch, the room's quiet pressing against me, and replay the night, their faces, their silence, their impossible presence across the street. I've always been the life of the party, the one who lights up a room, but now I feel small, fragile, as if those eyes saw through my bravado to the girl who fears she's not enough. I tell myself they were just odd patrons, a trick of the light, but the explanation feels hollow. I never see them again, and no answers come, just a lingering unease that shadows my steps. The red lantern is still my stage, but I scan the crowd now, wary of empty booths, of faces that don't belong, knowing some nights carry secrets I may never unravel. Part 5, Shadows in the Glass. The city's heartbeat thrummed beyond my apartment window, a restless pulse of neon and noise that never quite slept. I sat at my desk, the lamp's amber glow pooling over scattered notes, each page a fragment of terror, Sarah's, Kevin's, Lisa's. Their stories, now typed and saved, felt alive, whispering from my laptop screen like ghosts demanding witness. I'm Alex, a journalist chasing the uncanny, and these tales, gathered from bars' shadowed corners, had burrowed into me, reshaping my view of the world. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with damp, and my apartment, its creaky floors, its chipped mugs, seemed smaller, as if the walls were inching closer. I traced the edge of a notebook, its paper worn from my restless fingers, and felt a tug of responsibility. These weren't just stories, they were wounds, raw and unhealed, entrusted to me. But with that trust came a question, sharp as a blade: by writing them, was I preserving their truth or summoning their darkness? I stood, stretching my stiff limbs, and crossed to the kitchenette, the linoleum cool under my socks. Pouring coffee, the pots gurgle a familiar comfort. I replayed the voices in my head: Sarah's tremor, Kevin's clipped urgency, Lisa's faltering certainty. Each had faced something inexplicable in a bar, a place meant for escape but twisted into a stage for fear. I sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding me, and stared at the window, where my reflection flickered against the city's glow. I'd always seen bars as mirrors of the human soul, places where masks slip, where joy and despair dance too close. But these stories revealed a deeper truth: sometimes, those mirrors reflect something else, something that watches back. My fingers tightened on the mug, a reflex against the chill creeping up my spine, and I wondered if my obsession with the strange was a strength or a trap, pulling me toward answers I might not want. Needing air, I grabbed my coat and headed out, the stairwell's musty scent sharp in my nose. The street outside buzzed, taxis splashing through puddles, a deli's neon sign buzzing like a trapped fly. I walked, hands stuffed in pockets, until I reached the hollow note, a bar I'd never visited, its name scrawled in cursive neon above a weathered door. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the tang of hops and wax from candles flickering on mismatched tables. The crowd was sparse, two guys arguing over darts, a woman scrolling her phone, a jukebox humming a forgotten blues riff. I slid onto a stool, the leather cracked but soft, and ordered a whiskey neat, my usual shield to blend in. As I swirled the glass, the amber liquid catching candlelight, I thought of Sarah, her pool table a sanctuary until it wasn't. Her fear, of being tracked, of a stranger's car circling her street, clung to me, a reminder that safety is fragile, a thin pane of glass waiting to shatter. The bartender, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a crooked smile, leaned against the counter. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice warm but probing, like she'd seen 1,000 stories unfold in this room. I shrugged, my fingers tracing the glass's rim, a nervous tick. "Just thinking," I said, hesitant to spill my thoughts. Her name tag read Maggie, and her eyes, sharp despite the bar's dimness, seemed to weigh me. "This place hears a lot of thoughts," she said, wiping a glass with a rag, its fibers frayed like my nerves. I nodded, sipping my drink, the whiskey's burn steadying me. Maggie's words stirred a memory, not of the stories, but of my own past, nights spent in bars as a younger man, chasing meaning in strangers' glances, hoping to outrun my fear of being alone. That fear lingered, quieter now, but alive in my need to collect these tales, to find truth in their shadows. I wondered if Maggie sensed it, if she saw the hunger in my pause. "Ever hear anything weird around here?" I asked, my voice low, testing the waters. Maggie raised an eyebrow, her cloth pausing mid-swipe. "Weird how?" she countered, her tone curious but guarded. I hesitated, my thumb pressing into the stool's cracked leather, grounding me. "Like something that doesn't add up. People acting strange, things you can't explain." My words felt reckless, a step too far, but the stories urged me on: Kevin's intruder, Lisa's vanishing couple, Sarah's stalker. Maggie leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Folks come here to forget, not to be seen," she said. "But yeah, I've seen things. Shadows moving wrong, faces that don't fit. You learn to look away." Her words hit like a cold gust, and I gripped my glass tighter, my reflection in it wavering. Was she humoring me, or had she glimpsed the same abyss? I wanted to press her, but fear, of sounding unhinged, of hearing more, held me back. I shifted focus, steering the conversation to safer ground, asking about the bar's history. Maggie obliged, spinning tales of old regulars, fights, and jukebox quirks, her laugh a balm against my unease. But as she spoke, I kept circling back to the stories. Kevin's encounter, a man who knew his name, a knife in his bedroom, spoke of violation, of trust broken in a locked home. I imagined him now, checking his doors, his solitude no longer a choice but a cage. My pen, tucked in my pocket, felt heavy, a tool to capture his truth but not to free him. I scribbled a note on a napkin, what links them, the ink bleeding slightly, mirroring my scattered thoughts. The bar's hum faded, and I saw Lisa's face, her doubt as she questioned her own eyes. Her couple, silent and spectral, challenged reality itself, leaving her to wonder if she was unraveling. My own doubt echoed hers. What if these stories were delusions, or worse, invitations to something darker? Maggie moved to serve another patron, and I leaned back, the stool creaking under me. The hollow notes walls, lined with faded band posters, seemed to pulse with secrets, as if they'd absorbed every whispered fear. I thought of Sarah again, her smashed air tag, her sprint to safety. Her story wasn't just about a predator, it was about betrayal, of a bar's promise, of her own courage when she froze. I understood that paralysis, the way fear can lock you in place. As a kid, I'd hidden from bullies, my silence a shield, and now, chasing these tales, I wondered if I was still hiding, using others' fears to avoid my own. The whiskey's warmth faded, leaving a hollow ache, and I wrote another note, am I chasing truth or running from it, the words a confession I wasn't ready to voice. The jukebox shifted to a slower tune, its mournful chords weaving through the air, and I felt the stories converge, their threads tangling in my mind. Sarah, Kevin, Lisa, they'd each faced a moment where the ordinary cracked, revealing something raw, unnameable. Pursuit, intrusion, absence, their fears formed a pattern, a constellation of dread I couldn't fully map. I tapped my pen against the napkin, the rhythm a counterpoint to my racing thoughts, and considered the bars themselves. Clancy's, the skyline, the red lantern, each a stage, each a trap. Were they cursed, or were they simply mirrors, reflecting the chaos we carry? My fascination with the uncanny, born in childhood ghost stories, felt heavier now, a weight I both craved and feared. I wanted to solve these mysteries, to give their tellers closure, but the truth felt slippery, a shadow just out of reach. Maggie returned, her eyes softer now, as if she sensed my turmoil. You look like you're carrying the world, she said, pouring me another whiskey without asking. I smiled, faint but genuine, and murmured, just a few stories. She nodded, her gaze distant, and said, stories stick, don't they? Like stains you can't scrub out. Her words landed hard, and I saw a flicker in her eyes, regret, maybe, or recognition. I wondered what she'd seen, what she'd buried to keep working here, but I didn't ask. Instead, I raised my glass, a silent toast to her resilience, and drank, the burn a reminder of my own. I left a generous tip, my fingers lingering on the bills, a small act of connection in a night of questions. As I stepped outside, the city's damp air hit me, sharp and alive, and I glanced back at the hollow note, its neon sign a beacon in the dark. Walking home, the streets slick with rain's residue, I felt the stories settle in me, not as answers but as challenges. Sarah's fear, Kevin's violation, Lisa's doubt, they were pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve, not yet. My boots splashed through puddles, each step a vow to keep searching, to honor their trust. But doubt gnawed at me, what if these were random cruelties, mere tricks of the mind? Or worse, what if they were signs of something older, hungrier, lurking in the spaces we think safe? I reached my building, the stairwells echo louder than before, and paused at my door, key in hand. The lock's click felt flimsy, a gesture against the unknown. Inside, my apartment was still, but the air held a charge, as if the stories had followed me home. I sat at my desk, the lamp's light steady now, and opened my laptop, ready to revisit the words I'd written, knowing they were only the beginning.